College Football 25 has finally come out, and we can all dive into our first dynasty, whether it's a very good team or a very bad team. With that being said, I can guarantee most of you guys want the most realistic possible experience, so that's why today I brought you a list of the ways you can change your dynasty, edit the settings, as well as some other factors that you need to do yourself to make sure it is as realistic as possible and you're not taking some of the worst teams in the game to the national championship in 4 or 5 years, and also making recruiting as balanced as possible so it feels like you're an actual coach. With that being said, let's get straight into it. I just want to mention first real quick that these are not my idea. I'm reading it off of Reddit, so don't come at me if you've seen it already. But the first thing they say is to create a new coach. And at first you might think, well, doesn't everyone do that? But take a second to think. There are an option to choose, a coach that already exists and a coach that already has an upgraded skill tree. So by creating a new coach, you're completely starting out flat. I know you can choose your archetype. I'm pretty sure, motivator, discipline, recruiter, any of those can kind of shape where you get to spend points in terms of upgrading your coach and, maximizing your strengths and stuff like that. But by creating a new coach, you're going in as a rookie, no experience, not a very good coach. And that's part of the realism, is that if you were an actual coach, obviously you can't switch spots with, Lane Kiffin or whatever you want to say. So I would highly suggest do not pick a coach that already exists, just for immersion, realism, and it's also fun. You can make it your own name, you can make it a crazy name, do whatever you want with that. But definitely I would not recommend starting your dynasty as a coach that already exists. The next point kind of goes along with this, and that is to select a one-star program. So the Kennesaw States, the Sam Houston States, teams like that, where if you're an actual coach in real life who starts from nothing basically, unless you're a crazy player in college or whatever you want to say. But if you're kind of a rookie coach, you're not going to get a job at Ole Miss, Alabama, whatever. You're going to start somewhere one star. So again, this is one of those realism things. You have a fresh coach, not very many skill points at all. You go into one of the worst teams in the whole entire league, so there's going to be some building up from that, and that's part of the grind you're going to have to go through. 30 seasons is the cap, but you really don't want to have the national championship in your hands in 5 years and stuff like that, because that really takes away from the immersion factor. So by selecting a one-star program, you're really putting yourselves in a bad spot, and it's where you can make a move on the carousel a couple of years later when you prove you can win, maybe even go 800, 900, something like that. You don't need to go undefeated, but obviously you need to take that program up and beat the teams that you're playing in your conference who are also bad, and that's how you're going to move up the carousel and get a better job somewhere, maybe even in the Power 4. The next two are actual settings in the game, and the first one is coach XP the slowest, which means that you're getting XP the slowest, because in real life, some games are going way too fast with their XP. You start out a couple years, you have all this XP, you're like a 99 overall coach, whatever. By putting it to slowest, by putting coach XP to the slowest, it's the most realistic, because year by year you're slowly gaining ground, you're slowly becoming a better coach and learning the ropes, kind of, I guess you could say, in terms of coaching. And by putting it at the slowest, you're still incrementing. If you do well, you'll still get those points, but it's really not kind of an arcade style like maybe if you had it on the higher settings, where it really isn't meant for someone impatient who wants to grind and slowly gain those points. So that's why they say to put XP on the lowest. And the other one is the Heisman difficulty, which is pretty self-explanatory. If you played NCAA 14, everyone says to use Heisman difficulty, whether it's recruiting or whatever it is, on the field. Put it at Heisman, so it's the hardest. Once you beat that, you feel like you kind of beat the game, because it's not like you're in the middle with All-American, you can go up or down or whatever. If you put it at Heisman, never touch it again, forget about it, then you're always going to be playing with the toughest competition, so it's going to force you to become better, or you're going to get fired or something along those lines. The next point is a little bit broad. It says adjust sliders to your specific skill level to create a challenge, which I somewhat agree with, but I also feel like people aren't that self-aware, myself included. I don't think anyone really is, to say go into sliders and change this from 60 to 80 or whatever it is, because it's a different challenge. I'd rather almost keep it at 50s across the board and put it at Heisman, so that your strengths are actual strengths, because if you're putting sliders at different positions, then your strengths are getting drowned out because it becomes harder, if you can kind of understand what I mean. So I would like to keep it at 50, so that if you become good at something, you can actually utilize it like you would in a real game. Obviously in football, in real life college football, it's not bent towards what you're good at. if you're good at something, you're going to do it in a game. You're going to recruit well, whatever it is, what strategy you have. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to get rid of it by lowering the sliders that much or raising the sliders or whatever it is. So this one I'm kind of discrediting. Well, I am discrediting it because it doesn't make a lot of sense in my eyes. And for you personally, I would keep it at Heisman, and then whatever the default setting is, keep it at that. Unless there's some broken thing like in NCAA 14, put up kicking accuracy, lower interceptions or whatever it is like that. So I don't know, maybe I would just say to keep it all in uniform. The next one says use the play call cooldown and play call limit, so you have to be strategic and creative when play calling, which there is some truth to that, because you can't run 4 verts like you could in NCAA 14 if you have this setting on. Every play you hit your tight end, whatever it is, it's always going to be open. You throw it on a rope. So by doing this, you can't spam these broken plays. And obviously, if you're playing by yourself and offline and you're not going to do it, then you don't need to have this setting on necessarily if you want to play realistic, but it does help you play more realistic because defenses will pick up. So you have to put on these limits. It might be more customizable. I don't really know a whole lot about these settings, but it does do what it says. You have to be more strategic and creative. You have to dig deep into your playbook and maybe use some plays that you don't necessarily know how they work exactly, and try to figure it out as you would in a real game. Maybe if you're the quarterback or whatever it is and you're being put into a game where you don't really know what's going on. The next one says don't populate your recruiting board with 4 and 5 stars until later in the rebuild. They won't fall into your lap. You will have to be aggressive and go out of your way to land those players, especially when your team is a lower prestige. So I would agree with this, because there have been reports that just like in 14, the 4 and 5 stars have kind of slid through the cracks, is what I've been people saying. When the bigger schools just kind of miss them and they're really good players, and then you're Kennesaw State and you're getting a 5-star, which is not realistic. So if it is a little broken coming out of the gate, we can't complain that much. But for that, you just have to take control of yourself and say, don't do this because it's not realistic. So this point is a little bit on you. It's not really one of those hard and fast things like Heisman difficulty or play call limit. You just have to kind of figure it out yourself and kind of eyeball it if you think, is this actually realistic? If Kennesaw State, once again, could recruit this player and get him actually to commit to their school in real life. Finally, the last point, and one of ones that I think is actually the most important out of all these, is to schedule difficult games in the regular season on the road. If you give yourself a cakewalk of a schedule, of course it will feel easy. Challenge yourself in the tough environments. And one thing I've always said with Dynasty is the ability to make custom schedules every year is really kind of the biggest deciding factor of how difficult you want your Dynasty save to be. If you're scheduling the worst teams in the whole country, like UConn or something along those lines, then it's gonna feel easy once you become slightly good. Even if you're Kennesaw State and you're going 500, if you start to put these, like they said, cakewalk opponents on your schedule, it's gonna start to feel very easy. So it's very, very important to keep your opponents good and have some good and bad, so it's realistic. If you're Kennesaw State, maybe schedule Clemson one year just to see how your team would do against one of the best teams in the country, and you'll probably go there, make it realistic, play it at Clemson, get smacked 60-0 and get back on the bus and come home. But it's a fun experience, and it just makes it more realistic as opposed to scheduling UConn and UMass every year as you're out of conference, because then it gets old and then it feels like it's too easy. As of right now, it comes out in 1 hour, so thank you so much for watching. I can't wait for the game I've made content about for the last 6 months to finally come out. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one when the game is finally out.